Welcome to Rocket Ship, the podcast where web developers learn the skills and secrets to ship awesome mobile apps. I'm Simon Grimm, creator of Galaxies.dev, and today's guest is Krzysztof Magiera from Software Mention X, core React Native developer and currently director of engineering at Software Mention, creator of some of the most epic packages in React Native, and also the person who announced the React Native IDE at the Krakow meetup a few weeks ago. So, Krzysztof, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
It's great to have you on here because if I read through your bio on Twitter, it's just so amazing. Like director of engineering, ex React Native core, author, gesture handler, Reanimated, and React Native screens. That's just like you're basically covering all the important packages from the React Native ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, we started pretty early. That's kind of like the whole story starts like when I work at Facebook and specifically on React Native core team. That was many years ago. I think like 2014, 2015, somewhere around that time. So when React Native core team was like just a few people, and specifically I work on the Android side from the time where the project actually started at Facebook internally, and like this is how the story starts for me, and like this, like being part of this this effort at Facebook, and then through the time when React Native got open source, it allowed me to know a lot of things about the internals, and then allowed me to later on start working on things that just weren't there in the ecosystem. So the missing parts of React Native in the early days, and that's how we managed to build all those essential packages, and basically that's how it's how it's all started for us.
This is so amazing. So you've been there 2014 when React Native got started. Have you been like in the meetings when Facebook was thinking about should we do React Native, or like have you been really one of the first few people to write the first lines of code for React Native core?
Yeah, I mean, it was for Android though. So when I joined the team, React Native already existed as a proof of concept. So there was a proof of concept that worked on iOS, and then like we wanted to see how much effort that would be to port it to Android. So I was an like initial member of the Android kind of related efforts, and since I also know iOS development, that was kind of easy for me to adapt, because I knew I could easily read iOS code and then understand it very well, and then be able to write it up for Android. So that's how it started for me. Yes, and then but then like already React Native existed, so it was already turned from an idea to a like proof of concept to some basic apps that would render for iOS.
Have you been on site back then? I'm just curious. Have you been on site with Facebook back then, like in California, or have you worked from Poland?
Yeah, so on the React Native team, I was actually in London at the time. So where this was where actually the whole kind of React Native core native part of the team was formed. So we've been divided between React Native JavaScript team, and then React native team that would work on the native bits of the framework, and then the part that would work on the React bits of the framework, and also just the JavaScript APIs and stuff like that. So the JavaScript parts, including Packager, Metro, it was used to call differently. It was called Packager back then. So that was based in California, and then the native bits. It actually the proof of concept was completely built there, but then like we also migrated the iOS native team to London.
That's so cool. I'm just so blown away by this, that you've been one of the first people that I got more question about this. So I got actually two. So my one question is, did anyone at that point expect how big React Native would be like a few years later? I mean, you said it was in early stages, like a first few apps were built with it, but like, was there the dream or the hope that this would become probably the biggest cross-platform solution on earth, or what was your like your goal or your idea back then?
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone actually expected it, but I mean, there were a lot of people involved, so Possibly some people were anticipating that it will like evolve this way. So React Native was addressing a lot of issues that Facebook had internally building mobile apps, but also that you could encounter like when just like doing iOS or Android development, so specifically around the build times or like how long it takes for you to get, the updates that you are getting. So essentially just kind of adapting the developer experience that people had on web with React, because React was already kind of well established. It was still like pretty early in the early days of React, because React JS was open source like 2013, I think. Like Facebook a couple of months earlier than it got open source, of course. But also like, yeah, people were like sold to React at the time. Like everyone loved it. And even like JavaScript community, I also started loving it. So because like initially when it went out, it wasn't like that kind of like a popular choice for people, and there are a lot of objections, and people just didn't like some of the concepts, which now kind of became very natural for us. Like everyone is kind of building React like frameworks for JavaScript, but also for iOS, for Android, and for Rust and whatever. So everything is kind of centered around the same concepts. And React was like the first one to popularize this kind of approach, right?
Yeah, around that time I was still in Angular land and making the transition from Angular JS to Angular back then. And I think that was almost, they almost came up all at the same time. There was React, and then Vue came around, and they've all been around since then. But React just assembled the biggest community behind it, I guess. So in your team, then my last question about this era of your life, have there been a lot of Polish developers on the React Native core team? Because that would explain why the nation of Poland is carrying forward everything in the React Native ecosystem. I mean, if you had the roots already in the React Native core team back then.
I don't think there was anyone else from Poland except for me back then. And even through if I look forward a couple of months forward, and it was like the fact was that when it eventually went out as a public open source, because React Native was kind of privately open source at first, and then it went like fully public open source. There were a number of people from Poland who like started contributing to it at that point. But for the core team, I don't think there was anyone. I might be mistaken, but yeah, and we had some people from Poland that were working around like similar kind of infrastructure related teams, but not specifically on React Native.
Okay. So fast forward a few years, I'm not exactly sure. Did you start Software Mention, or did you join Software Mention?
Yeah, so that's kind of complicated. We actually started Software Mention together with my friends from college, but that was even before I was at Facebook actually. So it was in 2011. So we actually just had our 11th anniversary, just like a week ago, I think. And yeah, so we started a company back in 2000. I think it was 2012, of course, and then I took a little detour and joined Facebook for a while, and then when I moved back to Poland, I rejoined the company, and yeah, that's the whole story. So I'm a founder, but I wasn't here for some time in the middle of the company's existence.
It's like Steve Jobs and Sam Altman as well. Like
yeah, I never thought about that comparison, but I like it.
Yeah, you're the Steve Jobs of Software Mention. So there are some packages I would like to talk about. Maybe we're going to start with I wouldn't say it's not popular, but to me, it's not the most shiny packages, which is React Native Screens. I think this is like a very essential package for React Native apps. But for me, I've been using Expo Router and stuff, or React Navigation. I never really worked a lot with React Native Screens, as also the GitHub repository says it's fully integrated in Expo and React Native Navigation. So what is so great about React Native Screens, and which problem did it actually solve? Because at some point there was no React Native Screens.
Yeah, I think it's the impression that you get about the package is like how it was actually meant to be always. Like we never meant for this specific package to be kind of like a user facing one. I think so. What like the goal that we had in mind when designing it, when creating the package, was to give those native primitives for navigation, to make them available from the JavaScript perspective. So the same way as you have a text component that just turns into a iOS UI label or Android on text view, or you have text input that just turns into some other native component that you render, or a switch component that you can use from JavaScript and turns to like a iOS switch or Android switch. And you had all those components, but you didn't have the ones that are responsible for navigation related things. So like a UI navigation controller. So you could sort of use that through some APIs, but you didn't have like a full control over a given component. And I think so what we thought about is that just by exporting or giving a way of interfacing with those components would be something that's going to be very important for navigation related libraries, because they could just build on top of that without thinking about all those uh, native kind of aspects of components that you should be using when building a navigation based app. And navigation is just everywhere. You need to have that when you start a project. And yeah, we didn't have any specific API in mind when we started this. We collaborated with React Navigation, so that was kind of the first package to adapt screens. The API is basically just gives you a way of creating a navigation controller, or adding new screens to this navigation controller, or creating the models, stuff like that. So give you like a raw control over that. So this is pretty kind of advanced in a sense, but also something that we can build better abstraction on top of, and that's essentially what navigation libraries are doing. They're building better abstractions for you to use those components, and this package is kind of transparent to you. You don't really need to interface with this directly, but it's really important for you, such that your navigation that you have in your app, it uses the native kind of primitives for those reasons. And reasons are basically related to things like handling focus, keyboard handling, but also saving resources. Like when you compare React apps that are built for web and React Native apps that are built for mobile, the biggest difference is that when you have a web app and then you click on things and you just like switch between screens, what's happening is that like React wipes the whole previous screen away from you and then renders new screen. Whereas on React Native, you basically get a stack of things that are just appearing on top of each other. And this is just much more resource consuming, because you need to keep those other components in memory. They need to be there for the whole time. And those components, of course, so there's a component code that you have, and it takes some memory, of course, because it might have state, it might have other things. But then you might also be rendering images, and those images needs to be loaded into your memory as well. And like native needs to know about this fact, because it can optimize like what types of things are kept in the memory, that the images are no longer actually being visible, so you can deallocate a memory and then decode them again when they're appearing back. Or maybe you have a video component playing in the background, and you don't want this video to keep playing when you just open another screen on top of it. Or maybe you have a maps component, which are also very memory consuming, and you open something on top of maps. You don't want this map to actually be still active or tracking your location, things like that. So, or maybe you have some animations that's running on those screens that you're not interacting with. So, so the fact that you have the stacks instead of just replacing the view, it makes those aspects really important to you need to consider them, and that's why those native primitives are built actually.
Yeah, well, I was laughing when I heard you talk about deallocate, and I was remembering writing alloc in C++, or was it in Objective-C? I don't know, the allocation of stuff long ago. So it says, I mean, it's one of the first sentences on the repository. It is not designed to be used as a standalone library, so that should inform everyone what this is about. I feel like from your description, this is basically like one of these NPM packages that everyone's silently pulling into their app, and one day you mess up the package and 95% of the React Native builds will fail. Is it like that? Because pretty much every application will use React Native screens at this point, right?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the most frequently installed one because it's just like ships with navigation. So like when you start a new project, you need to have navigation, but you don't necessarily need to have animations or other stuff. So yeah, this one is the most frequently one that like out of the packages that we currently maintain to be installed. But I hope we won't mess anything up.
Yeah,
I don't think it actually happened. So
thanks for creating it. it's amazing. I would just like to know, I mean, it's not meant to be really used by us, but is there anything like hidden inside that's like good to know? Is there something we can actually interact with that's like a hidden feature of React Native screens not a lot of people know about?
Well, not necessarily from maybe like a application developer perspective. When you build a library for React Native, then yes, so there are some considerations that, I mean, there are things that you can integrate with in order to provide, some kind of mechanism for handling those, events of screens being not visible or visible. Yeah, but there's also a lot of things that we added to screens over the course of the past years that might not be as frequently used. So things like integrating with the those are all actually available through React Navigation. It's just like there are just so many options there that people might just be lost there. So things like search bar, for example. So search bar that's kind of embedded into the navigation bar, or different options for making the navigation bar translucent or blurred, or all those fancy native effects that you get for free when using native components. Things like handling the how is it called, the
Which
insets
part?
of when you have like a notch or something on your phone.
Oh yeah.
Or
The save
or
areas.
save area stuff, or just handling the status bar, basically, because like there is a status bar API that's kind of in React Native core, but so the issue with it, it's just it's imperative, so you can call method set make it dark, but this doesn't always this doesn't always work, because it just might sometimes get out of sync with like what screen you're looking at. So it's actually better suited to be a part of screen settings, because then screen really controls when this screen is being visible, and you can assign like on this screen you want the bar to be dark, or on this screen you want the status bar to be light, or something like that.
I see.
So this kind of control is like what we have there.
Is something like I put the app into the background and my app screen is blurred, like when you have some sort of fintech application. Is this something that would be handled by React Native screens, or would that be a different package?
Yeah, it could potentially be handled by screens. We also have an API that allows you to kind of control the whole window of your application. So in that moment when you are your app to be blurred, you actually want to blur the whole window. So regardless of whether you have a navigation or you have a model, you want it to be blurred completely. So potentially something that can be also added on the screen stuff.
I mean, it's like a privacy thing you see in some of the banking applications. Also in React Native screens, the swipe to go back, is this part of React Native screens, or is this already something we should talk about next? The next package, the gesture handler.
So this is kind of both.
Nice transition. I nailed it.
Both things are true at the same time. So one thing is that so screens, what it makes it available for from the JS is that it allows you to have the navigation controller on iOS, and the navigation controller on iOS has its own built-in handling for the back gesture. So you don't need to do anything special about it. You don't need gesture handler library or anything like that. It's just like a kind of an element of this native component that you can have. But this is not true on other platforms. So on Android, you like the native kind of fragment container that we're using as like a native primitive for navigation. It just doesn't have that. So in order to have this, you need to use gestures, and then like there are also many ways of handling this. It's also not something that's people or Android users are used to, but in some cases it makes sense for this interaction to be there. And then you can use other packages to define it the way you want it.
Yeah, I was just asking. I'm an iOS user, so I know on Android you have the hardware back button. So is this usually how people go back? I think apps usually don't have the swipe to go back. I mean, on Android, on iOS you have this transition from like slowly going back, like it blurs the header and something is going on. On Android, you just have this like page close. I don't know how to describe that animation, right?
Yeah. So Android is kind of complicated because it historically had like a whole keyboard, and even with a joystick or a D-pad that you could actually have like in very old phones. And then they started, then they only have like, I think there were 5 buttons that they were left. There was like a menu button, like no one even remembers now. But the React Native, this developer menu, it used to be hooked to that button. So you could actually press the menu button on Android and it would actually open the dev menu for you. And then they went back to just 3 buttons, like back, home, and then, it was just like opening. I don't remember even at this moment.
I'm looking
and now there are no buttons actually. Like a lot of phones, Android phones, they don't really have any buttons. But then like a lot of apps already use and are hooked to this back button kind of functionality. So this is not something that they could just remove along with getting rid of actual buttons. So some phones have the button bar that just gets displayed on the bottom, but then you can also use it without it, and then you actually have the back swipe then. But it's not like an interactive back swipe, so you can actually swipe back, but this will be actually handled by the system for you, and this will emulate the back button. So you use the swipe gesture, it just shows you some indicator that this is going back. It shows you like a back arrow just appearing from the side of the phone, and then it actually triggers the back action.
Okay. Well, let's talk about more interesting animations and gestures then on Android. So your second most popular package is the React Native gesture handler. I currently looked it at 5.6K stars on GitHub. So could you just describe briefly why you created that package initially, as I think there was already a gesture handling API available with React Native at that point?
Yeah, so this was actually one of the first packages that I worked on after leaving Facebook. So it's actually like one of the first things that I built after I left was the animated native driver API. So when I left Facebook, I don't remember even what year was that. Even while at Facebook, we started collaborating with Expo a lot because Expo was like adapting, like when among first adopters of React Native, and they also like built a team around it and just help a lot with handling the community related things and handling like a lot of things that were just missing in React Native and were needed by people using React Native externally. So it was a very important partner. And when I left, we also kind of continued to collaborate. I continued to collaborate with them directly, and essentially like what we started thinking of is like what are the weak points of the framework, and the biggest issue was with animations. So the animation were suffering because of the fact that they would require you to run on the main JavaScript thread, which was already busy with rendering React. So the idea was to take advantage of the fact how animated was kind of designed in a declarative way and try to get it out of the JavaScript thread. So that's how the native driver idea came to be, and that was my kind of first contribution to React Native as an external contributor. So once we had animations, then another aspect of this was that you wanted to have interactive gestures, and while the animations could run completely off the JavaScript thread, then the gestures would still require you to go to JavaScript, talk with the JS responder system, and then communicate it back to animations or do some updates on the screen. This was kind of a not the experience wasn't in par with like what you could get on native Android or iOS, and so we started designing gesture handler around that. So that was the first kind of library or external package that we developed at Software Mention, and it was basically just to fill the gap of needing to have more smooth and interactive animations on in React Native.
Yeah, I mean it's an Epic package, just like Reanimated. So just to round it up, that would be the third package. We can talk briefly about that in a second. I just really like how these things put everything into like the native threads and how it works in general. It's still mind blowing to me a bit how it works, but it's very obvious to understand that this increases the performance dramatically and makes this a lot better. Now, the React Native gesture handler is, I don't know how old it is, but it's been around a bit. What are like things you have still planned for the future? I don't know if you're still actually involved in the future development of the gesture handler, but maybe you know about. Is there anything else planned? Because it kind of sounds like it's done.
Yeah, I mean it's done, but it's also in some aspects it is done, and there are also some other aspects how it can evolve, and it's the software development it can be just compared to the having a mown around your house that you need to lawn, right? So if you're not lawning it, then it becomes unmaintainable. So that's we still have people who are actively maintaining it. There are issues, of course, that needs to be addressed. There are new kind of additions that we are also making to the API, and recently we don't have like a huge roadmap or vision for gesture handler, for example, or for screens. It's mostly like we try to listen to the feedback from the community, or feedback that we also like produce internally at Software Mention, because we are very well positioned to expand those or work on those packages, because our company is as a software development services company, and we have 20 something different React Native projects. So we have big teams internally who work with React Native, who work on React Native projects, and have real life examples of the ways how those packages are being used. So we have direct feedback, and this also helps a lot in making it better, making it work continuously in newest versions and stuff like that. So things, we're adding some smaller things to gesture handler. There is also we are investing in expanding support beyond iOS, Android. So we have some efforts. We already have to some extent support the web platform. We have efforts to support macOS, Windows, so other platforms basically.
I wonder if in the future, when the Apple Watch has this finger tap gesture, isn't that a gesture as well? Is this something for the React Native gesture handler? I wonder. The new Apple Watch you can like control with your fingers to like accept a call or stop music, so you don't have to like use your other hand.
Yeah,
but it's more like
it's more like a
body gesture.
Yeah, it's more like an event, perhaps, that it's just controlled from gyroscope. I don't know. It's kind of some movement related device. I don't know.
Yeah, probably that. So yeah, good for you. So you don't have to do anything about that, and we can just get it. So
thankfully, so the gestures that are kind of like immediate and I call it discrete gestures that just happen like once, like tapping or something like that. They're not really that problematic. So the most problematic ones that you really expect it to work smoothly and performantly are the continuous gesture when you drag something, or when you pinch or zoom or rotate things. So those are the most tricky ones, because then those are actually typically associated with some animations that need to run continuously and be up to date with your movement, they cannot really lag behind, because then you would notice. And when you tap and then you have like a 50 or 100 milliseconds even delay after tapping, this is really almost unnoticeable.
Mm-hmm. So that also means like these gestures you're talking about, like the long tap or dragging something along, that always requires an animation library as well, because that is not part of React Native gesture handler. This is just capturing the gesture itself, but then making sure that in a performant way we can redraw the box or whatever is on the screen. We would then use Reanimated, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is the third package, and I think it's actually your most popular with almost 8,000 stars on GitHub. And I mean, pretty much everyone should know about Reanimated, but could you give like just the brief information, the brief overview what Reanimated is or means for React Native?
Yeah, I think so. So Reanimated is actually, the most kind of user-facing library that we have and develop, and it gives you a way of defining gesture-based interactions in a performant way, such that they execute on the UI thread. They don't take up the precious time of the main JavaScript thread that renders your components. So Reanimated gives you that. So it gives you a way of defining some, starting from simple transitions that are just like type of like a fire and forget. So you start an animation and then it just runs until it's, finished. But it also gives you a way of integrating with things like gestures, or maybe scrolling behaviors, or maybe your device sensors. And all of that can be, fed into the Reanimated, and it could, update it in a performant way. So you can define different interactions based on all those kind of inputs. And beyond that, we also have in Reanimated a thing that we call layout animations, which allows you to very easily define transitions of your components on the screen. So you could define in a very easy way how every component can be, like how it should appear on the screen. If it moves to a different position on the screen or resizes, it also can be handled by layout animation. And most importantly, I think the exit animation, which is something that's been pretty tricky to get right in React. This is something that's also Reanimated provides in layout animations, and is something that's kind of unique feature of this library.
I think everyone in development hates exit animations. Like you always get the problem of when do you remove the element? So you have to wait until the animation of the exit is actually done. Then you can remove the actual DOM element or whatever you got. I feel like I heard this on a podcast before. Like everyone's struggling with exit animations. But yeah.
Yeah, with Reanimated, you don't really need to think about that. It's just like a prop that you set on the view. And thanks to the fact that Reanimated actually integrates with the renderer that's happening on the device, your component can be long gone after, and the animation could still continue, because we can do this because we operate on the native kind of hierarchy rather than on the React hierarchy. So we don't really need to care that much about like what's happening in React. And you don't need to, really control the whole flow of, keeping the component active for the animation duration.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Reanimated. I think I used it in a stream and in a course on Galaxies. Also regarding the layout animations, I think this can be also really well described. And if you have just like a list and you add items to the list, like the animation of how items come into the ellipse or leave that list, that is a beautiful example of layout, of entering and exit animations, where you can demonstrate pretty much everything. But everything else, also the hooks, I've done like parallax image scroll with Reanimated. I've done like scroll and then the header bar fades in. It's also unbelievable easy with with Reanimated, and especially with Reanimated 3. I think I haven't used the versions before, but now with all the hooks, it's just super easy. The one thing that I kind of have a love-hate relationship with is the shared animations. So I think shared animations are epic. I click on a card and it opens another screen, and the item from that one page is displayed bigger on the next page. And that's usually the example you see for a shared element transition. However, I sometimes have problems with this, especially with Expo Router. I think it's due to like the insets, the save area. If I have a status bar or if I don't have a status bar, or header bar. I think these things kind of confuse the shared animations. And also, as far as I know, shared animations are still pretty early. And finally, then my rant is over. Finally, I would really love to have more properties for shared animations, because so far they're like 5 to 10 things like position, width, scale, I don't know, that you can animate. So I really love to know, what are the plans for shared element transitions in the future? Are you actively putting work into this and making this a bigger feature?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's still kind of an early feature, and we like our I think ability to ship like a quality libraries roots in the fact that we use them on a daily basis, as software mentioned, and on different projects. And for shared element transitions, we don't really have that many use cases, so we don't really have like a good feedback on that. And we also haven't really received a lot of feedback from the community on shared element transitions. And I definitely understand and agree with the fact that it's not as polished feature as others in Reanimated, but it's also something we don't really have a lot of feedback about. So yeah, if you are listening to this and you have issues with shared element transitions, feel obliged to create an issue for it, because we need that to make it better.
Yeah, I definitely vote for that as well. I mean, it's so far already pretty great what's possible and how you can create your own workload to define the transition. But I think there's more possible in the future, and I'm pretty sure you will get to that point, because I don't think you have the technical issues to implement this. Yeah, as you said, you just probably don't know what you actually need or want to implement.
Yeah, so the issues are mainly in the fact that it needs to integrate with many different things. Like you mentioned, Export Router, for example, it's also something that we haven't really tested it very well with, because we would actually need to have an Export Router project and then also use shared transition in it. And this combination is going to be very unique based on the fact that those two things are also very early, right? So there are some people who are using Export Router, there are some people who are using shared transitions, and then the mix of those, it's just like very it's even fewer people who are using both of them at the same time, and might also have some extra requirements that might not be working well in Reanimated or in Explorer.
So I will keep an eye on Reanimated and the shared elements transition. I think currently we're at version 3.4 or something, or maybe even later. Yeah, 3.5 actually, 3.5. So looking forward to version 4. Now, I actually found Krzysztof because I saw a post go almost viral on Twitter. In that post, Krzysztof presented something, and I looked at it and I thought, I have seen that application before. It looks so familiar to me. And I was zooming into the screenshot of what Krzysztof was presenting, and it was actually my Airbnb clone that I released like a few days ago. So, first of all, thanks for using that. I was so happy. I actually showed it to my wife. I said, "Here, look, this expert was using my application. I'm so happy today." But this is not about my Airbnb clone. This was just an example. What you did was, you posted something, and to this day, which is actually a few weeks before this goes live, it has already 600 bookmarks, 1.5k likes, 400 retweets, over 300,000 views on Twitter. So, Krzysztof, what did you demo at the Krakow meetup that made React Native on Twitter explode like this?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for making those apps and making them public and the source code public. So that's really useful. And I actually likewise and find yourself when I saw this app on Twitter just a few days before. It was actually 2 days before I actually meant to demo the project. And I figured, I mean, that's what I was looking for, because I was kind of thinking, hey, this demo I created, it just looked ugly, and people, it just won't actually make an impression, or this impression was in a big part thanks to how your demo app looked like. So
nice, thank you.
That's also thanks to that. Yeah, but anyway, so the project I was demoing was the IDE, React Native IDE project we started developing some time ago at Software Mention, and this is something that we try to to make available sometime soon, hopefully, to everyone. And the project is around just making the whole developer experience better for React Native developers, because that's something I feel like it's really an area that lacked a lot of attention for years, and the fact that we have so many React Native developers or so many packages is just miracle. Like how people get so far without a great tooling about that. Like people really need to learn a lot, and in order to start working with React Native, and the kind of the entrance bar for the technology was like really high for a lot of people, and perhaps we would have even have more people working on React Native right now if it wasn't like lacking for so many years. But anyways, like we at Software Mention, we have this a great team that we build around open source. We also have other open source or dev experience related teams working on like completely different areas that we have at Software Mention. But we've been thinking for some time already. Like we built Reanimated gesture handler screens. We now maintain React Native SVG. We contribute to React Native Core. Like we also contributed a lot of Fabric migrations across like the community libraries. And yeah, we are very well positioned to make big impact in React Native community. So that's what we wanted to do. And like we were looking for different ways of how we can actually make this impact. And we were looking at things like what things would actually make, the life for developers better. Would it be like another package that we might be able to come up with? But this is pretty, the field is like very competitive now, and there are a lot of people who are building packages. We also work with Expo and have and our team at Software Mention created the Expo Modules API. Expo Modules is essentially a way which makes it much easier for anyone to build package for React Native, to build their
It's
own,
awesome. Yeah, it's
to
awesome.
build their own
Just
kind
one
of component.
Awesome.
So this is something that we built at Software Mention as well, and so that's kind of like contributions that we are thinking of. So we want to make it better for everyone, and not necessarily by creating more packages, but maybe giving them a way of building those packages better, or making a way for them to build apps better. And that's how this the whole idea about the IDE came to be. So we wanted to improve the developer experience. It also comes from like one of the ideas it's just based on the feedback that we got on the State of React Native survey that we run last year. So we have this survey that we plan also to launch this year. So we already started collecting questions. So if there are people who are willing to contribute to the questions, then we can maybe share a link somewhere to how to contribute to this discussion. And yeah, so one of the biggest things that people listed on the survey was that like the developer experience sucks, and it's definitely something that I could sign up. So definitely agree with this statement. It just wasn't great. It was okay for me because I already knew Android and I knew iOS development before I started React Native. But it isn't this great for people coming from web, for example, because when they want to go to start adopting React Native, they need to learn iOS tooling, they need to learn Android tooling. And if you look at other people who are not even experienced with React, then when they want to start React Native project, they not only need to learn React, but they also need to learn all those other tools, right? Yeah. So this was really complicated, and we wanted to make it very streamlined. So like one of the approaches is what Expo is doing. So they are actually accumulating a lot of that kind of ideas and problems into the CLI that Expo has, and it's really great. But we're thinking like how to make it even better. Like when you look at other UI frameworks, or for Android development, for iOS development, every time it just starts with an IDE. So you have Xcode for iOS. Like no one is actually building iOS apps from the command line, unless they hit some scale issues. Then that might become a consideration. But when they start, they just use Expo or Swift Playground, it needs to be very easy for them to get hooked. And
I mean, there are probably some people using Vim to write Swift code, like the Primeagen would probably use it.
So that's typically people start with like whatever is recommended to them at the framework website or iOS development website or Android development website, and that's the IDE. So you go to Android website and you learn you should install this, and then you install Android Studio, and there is like a wizard that you click through to you want to have like a single activity, whatever. Then it installs SDKs for you, and then you have like a play button. You click it, and then your app just builds and run on the emulator that just sits there. And here the idea was the same. Like we want this to be like a very streamlined experience. We want them to get this tool installed and create a new project, or even have this tool create the project for them, and then just have a way of running it. And this actually we actually tried even to make it to the extreme where you don't need to click anything in order to make it run. So it just would actually build for you without you doing anything.
You could actually nicely also, if you want to have this wizard-like setup, you could integrate XpoStack. So I previously talked with Dan Stepanov, who's building XpoStack.dev, which is like a CLI tool to bootstrap Expo applications. So you can select which packages you want to add, and it automatically creates this application, like even with Firebase or Supabase backend, which would be another thing to make the process of getting started easier. But I want to quickly, just before we have to wrap up, talk about a few of the key features of this IDE. So I don't want to give the wrong impression. It is not an IDE itself. It is an extension for Visual Studio Code, as far as I understand. And it comes with cool tools like integration to Expo routers. You can, like, from a drop down, select which route you want to go to. You can use some sort of debugging tool, which we know from the web. So you have like an inspector, you can click on your emulator and it pops up the according code snippet. Like, what are the highlights of this React Native IDE? And especially, like, you presented this at the Krakow meetup, which was quite a big meetup. Like, in which cases or at which features was the audience like, ooh, like, where did they react the most? Which was the hottest feature according to the audience?
I was actually expecting the audience to have more kind of reactions than they surfaced. There wasn't, like, a lot of people were just quiet. Maybe they were in awe. I don't know.
Yeah, they were just stunned. Like, it was so amazing.
I didn't. Yeah, really was a little bit confused while presenting it. But so the extension, this is an extension. Like, we call it an IDE project, but in fact, it's something that you can install with VS Code. I think there are a lot of advantages of that. A lot of people internally at Software Mention and also in the community, I know they use VS Code for React Native development, and it's also a great tool. So building around the extension for VS Code was kind of what we were aiming for, and that's how it's structured right at the moment. Not sure if that's something we all, whether we were going to stick with VS Code or not. That's kind of like a different discussion. But what it makes possible is that when you open a React Native project, it gives you kind of like a side-by-side view of the iOS simulator or Android emulator. You have like a select box there. You can switch between these two depending on like where you want to test it. And it just appears side by side to your code, and it kind of, the goal is for this to be very well integrated into the editor experience. So things like you mentioned, like, for example, there is like an inspect button. You click on a button, you can hover over the emulator, click on any element, and it will navigate you to the component where this element is defined. So this is something I already use a lot. I almost use it all the time. It's like very, really convenient, especially when you take some project that you are not familiar with the code base very well, and that's also like very frequent use case already, because people, even though if they're like they're familiar with some parts of the code base, especially when the app is big, they don't necessarily are familiar with everything there. So that's very convenient feature for you to navigate to the source code, then be able to change something.
Yes.
Something that I really use a lot.
I use it in the browser all the time for debugging my web applications.
Yeah. So now instead of, in a web browser, you get instead of navigating to component, you get it navigates you to the DOM element there. So that's another step you need to take in order to actually locate the actual source code for this. So thanks to the fact that it runs in an editor, you just navigate it to the editor, and you can change it there, and then it hot reloads, and then you can just update it in the real time almost. So that makes it very, very seamless. It makes it for a very seamless experience.
I assume we could have like a full episode on just how that feature works, like how this inspect clicking into that view opens my code editor. Is that like a web view running in that simulator, or?
Not the simulator. So the extension, so VS Code is like an Electron app. So it's a web view, and the extension that you build for VS Code, they're also web views. So whatever you want to render inside of VS Code is a web view. So this called like a simulator window is also kind of like a web view that just displays you this stream of like what's visible in your simulator or the Android emulator. But yeah, so going back to the features. So as you mentioned, also there is this this Expo router integration that we built, and that's we're just experimenting a lot. So the whole to get it to the point where it's now where you can take a project, it builds, runs inside of the VS Code. Then we have like plenty of different ideas what we can add on top of that. And one thing was Expo router integration. So we can show you a navigation bar. And when you open new screens, then it updates in the real time, and you also have a history, so you can go back in history to other places in your app. And we also use it for this other feature that we have that we call the follow functionality. So follow makes it possible for us to track where you edit certain component code and what screen you look at when you're editing it. And we also can take advantage of the fact that we have a React DevTools integrated in the whole thing, so we can know exactly at which screens you are rendering which components, and we kind of try to make this association. And we also this way we allow for just automatic switching between the screens on your phone when you are changing between editors. So you want to edit this component, we know this component was on that screen, then we can automatically navigate you to that screen. So this whole thing works thanks to integration with Expo Router, because we need to know whenever someone changes a screen and like what's on that particular screen, and we also need to have a way of opening a given URL or a given screen. So that's another thing we have. We also have the whole debugger, as you mentioned, integrated. So that's something that it's been really difficult to get set up and in React Native for years. Like there were like tons of different solutions. None of those were like perfect or great. And this is also not perfect, but we kind of try and aim for this to be really, really good and work really great. So it's like the first thing is just it's completely automatic. You don't need to do anything about it. It just runs there, and you have the debugger connected by default. So if you have an exception that it's thrown somewhere and it's unhandled, then it will pause at that line, so that instead of reading through the stack trace, locating the code, and then figuring out like what you need to really change for this to work or not crash, then you are already stopped at this point where the exception was thrown, and you can see like what are the variables, whether it's like undefined or why it could be undefined, stuff like that. So it just like stops by default. And then you can also set the breakpoints. So you can set breakpoints when you log something. It's also integrated with VS Code debug console. So when you have like a console log, it shows in this one place where the logs are appearing in VS Code. And then it also shows with a link to the line where the log was generated, because that's also something I use a lot. I just put a lot of logs everywhere. And then when I click on things, I just don't know where those logs are. And if they're annoying, then I want them to be removed. So
that is so helpful. Like these things alone are just so helpful. I still remember like when you debug some Swift code and you put a breakpoint, and then it's like you are somewhere in an NSURL session because that was where the breakpoint was initially like thrown, and you're like, well, I want to debug my code, not as some random Apple class. And if you can just like instantly transfer this back to the line of code in the React Native app, I mean, wow, that's like, yeah. these are just, I mean, I would have said, wow, if I were then in the audience of that talk. I think there's one more thing that's called like a component preview package. I was curious about this because I talked to Daniel before, who's like doing Storybook for React Native. I wonder how this is like comparable to Storybook, or I think you even had some interaction with Daniel because he wanted to help out with that.
Yeah, so at this moment we don't really have any any action or any plans to integrate it. I mean, we do have plans, but we don't really have enough time to work on that. But the idea of the preview is that you could have a individual component to be rendered outside of the context of your application. So if you have some design system or stuff like that, and you want to develop certain features in isolation, that's like a kind of perfect way of doing this in React Native. So instead of having your app being like very complex thing that you need to run every time you change something, and then maybe you want to change something on one screen, but then when the app reloads, you need to start from sign in window. You need to log in or click through so many screens, and then only get to that certain element. So we wanted to make it such that you can define, some entry points that are smaller. And that was kind of, I think that was the first idea behind the whole project. So we wanted to build this specific functionality. And then we started, thinking that, hey, we already have the preview, and then we can maybe just show you the whole app, or maybe even add debugging to it. So that's the kind of like where the whole project started. And kind of has there is some overlap here with like what Storybook does, because like with Storybooks you already need to have those entry points defined. So I could see this being like very well integrated, and that's something we eventually want to work on. I don't have much more to say at this moment. I don't know like how the things will turn out here, but there is definitely some overlap. And I think from the demo I was showing, it was like very easy and simple example, because you only have I don't even remember what I had in the demo, but there was like a completely kind of isolated component that didn't take any kind of context into consideration.
Yeah, it was like a header search box or something.
Yeah, it didn't require any props to be injected, but in real life it's not that easy. Like components have properties. Components may be reading from the storage. Components may require some context providers to be defined on top of your application. And I think we're very well positioned to provide a lot of those things automatically. So the fact that we're kind of integrated with Expo Router, for example, we can take the context from like what you need for an Expo Router, and instead of just rendering it standalone, we can take the the Expo Router context and render the component inside. And then relying on the fact that all the context providers you have, they should already be there. So handling this more kind of automatically for the users is our goal here. And then maybe the final feature is just the settings that you can change on the simulator emulators and things like the text size. So I found those things to be often just not a lot of people really test their applications under different text settings, for example, and a lot of people actually change that from my experience. And my parents also, including my parents, they need to change that, otherwise they wouldn't really be able to use their phones. So testing things under those different settings, it's something that people just don't do, because it's also it's not very easy for them to change that. Even if you want to do that, then you need to go to the device settings and then change it somewhere, and then do it again if you want to test it, and you don't really have a good way of comparing before and after. So just making it available on a single click, it's something that I'll hopefully make more people test those things.
All of these things, they sound so amazing. I was looking at the thread, so I will put this also in the show notes so people can check it out. You have like 8 or 9 little videos where you show the different features. So that's even better visually taking a look at this. My only question is really, when can I get my hands on this? Like, how big is your team? Have you planned any bigger features, or do you really now try to work towards a release in the near future?
Yeah, so the team is very small, so it's actually just myself right now. But so I was working on this alone for some time, and I think we just didn't know like where this will lead us. So I was exploring a lot of different ideas there, and kind of wanted for some time now, or for like 2 months or so. I was thinking like where this is going, where this is heading. And so the idea that I had was that I want to be able to present it to someone, and then like maybe then figure out like what, and see like what the reactions are, what people think, and then based on that kind of figure out what to do next. And yeah, so for like a month, I was working with another person here at Software Mention, with my colleague on getting it to the point where it's like presentable, when it, all those things really work really well now. The things that I was presenting, there are no cuts there. It's just like I presented it live. Actually, it was I think my first live demo actually did on stage. So those things just work and pretty well, and it also looks nice. So wanted to see what people's reactions are, and they exceeded my expectations. So a lot of people really interested in that. You also mentioned like, yeah, it got the post. It got like 300,000 views on Twitter, which is like more than I could have really imagined. So it's like 6x whatever I did in the past. So really happy to see this kind of response and response from the community, and it looks like people really need this. And so now we are in the process of expanding the team. So we're getting more people on board, and want to accelerate the progress. We will soon start the phase where, so we actually want to use it internally at Software Mention. We want to get the teams to use it. And this will hopefully happen in the next week or two. And based on the feedback we will get there, we'll proceed accordingly. I could say that. I mean, I would hope that like some time in like early next year, this will be like publicly available. But yeah, there are also many factors. I also want to make sure that it's really well polished, because that's kind of my experience with other related tools in the past, was that when it's there, I would give it a try. But if it doesn't work for me, like I don't think I will actually give it another try in the next couple of months. So want to make sure that this will work very well for people from day one, because otherwise they might not really get hooked in, or even try to attempt to use it again, because people get will base their opinion on the first impressions.
Yeah. I mean, you presented probably an MVP of this project, but you really want to ship like a minimum lovable version of that project, at least that people can really like. My recommendation would be to sprinkle in a bit of AI. Every good tool today needs a bit of AI. So I just saw something today, which is the Visual Studio Code extension. So you can just draw something, and it turns like there's a button, make real, and then it turns it into a React Native code. So I don't know how, but definitely the React Native IDE needs some AI sprinkled into it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, my head is full of ideas and of different sorts. So we have more ideas than time to make them, and there is a lot of complexity in React Native, and in the build pipeline, in the run pipeline, and people are using React Native with different configurations. So getting that covered, I don't think will ever be possible. So we need to limit ourselves to supporting certain ways of certain project configuration. Like, for example, the first version will only support greenfield apps, or apps that are built with React Navigation or Expo Router. So we will need to put some constraints on like what we support, or we will also likely limit versions, React Native versions. So if you're like running on 670, then that's not an option for us. I don't know. I don't know yet, like what kind of constraints we need to put for this to make it possible for us to bring a good experience to people from day one.
I'm sure that if somebody can do it, then Software Mention can do it. So thank you for all the packages for React Native Screens, Gesture Handler, Reanimated, and for the upcoming React Native IDE. Thank you so much for putting in all the times. And of course, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and taking the time.
Thanks a lot.
Where can people find out more about you or your project? Where should they go? I will put the links in the show notes.
Yeah, I think like the X thing is where I'm most active on. So everything there should be an X. And other than that, it's GitHub. Search for Software Mention on our company's main repo. There are a lot of bookmarks there and interesting projects, and there are also some other packages that we haven't talked about. So checking them out, and yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I will put all of that, the links in the show notes so people can check it out. Also, of course, check out galaxies.dev, where I host my online courses, which I can base on all these great packages like Reanimated. I still plan a course on the gesture handler, so that's definitely something on my list for the future. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the React Native IDE, and I hope to bring you back in 2024 when the React Native IDE drops. Hopefully that's in like January, February, March. Yeah, well, early 2040, right? Have a great time, and thanks for joining me, Krzysztof.
Yeah, thank you.